Okay, Unit 8 of the course is called the Information Age. And in this unit, we're going to be focusing on two basic categories of information. One are online databases, and the second, online newspapers, digital newspapers, and everything. Um, and so before I get to the note here, these are all the different links for online database resources available through the NVCC library and then also through Viva, which is a consortium of uh, college libraries throughout the state of Virginia. What's amazing is the amount of information and the kind of databases that are available. Let's just click here on history, and you see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then humanities general and everything. What's interesting about these are that, for example, arts and humanities search. 20 years ago, when you were looking for information on a topic, you had to go to the library and actually scan through paper indexes for each year. For, like, for example, 1980, 1979, 1978. You had to go through year by year these enormous paper indexes looking for um, topics and articles that related to your research and everything. And if you looked in the wrong place, you didn't find it and everything. Now it's so much simpler because you can just do an online search through these enormously useful databases. And there's a whole series of them, and it's really, really important that you take advantage of this. Um, you can find the scholarly literature and information on a topic that's going to help you with your research and your project and everything. Um, Before I talk a little bit about newspapers, you're reading in the Rosenzweig textbook this year. This unit deals with building an audience and building an audience for your web-based project. And it's something you should always have in mind, because one of the things about when you're determining your goals and objectives and setting up your project, you got to really tailor that to who your audience is. And since the audience for most of my web-based projects has always been my students and online courses and everything, I have a different kind of agenda and a different kind of way of setting things up than if I was trying to make money with my web materials. Now, some of my projects don't have a focus on my students and for example, my Slayton postcards project and everything. And for that reason, I have an entirely different objective in setting it up, and that, of course, means I have an entirely different way that I've set it up. Um, and so you got to always keep in mind audience. Now, I don't really let it overly determine the nature of my project, and that's largely because I don't deal in profit type web materials. If I was dealing with profit materials, I'd have to do a lot of things very different in an effort to make money. Um, so you got to keep that in mind, this idea of your audience. And what Rosenzweig said is really, really good. And so keep that in mind as you go on to work on your projects and everything. Um, but let me just say one last thing about audience before I move on to newspapers. What Rosenzweig really doesn't talk about here is the idea of personal satisfaction or kind of personal achievement in creating some sort of web-based project and everything. And that really goes a long way in motivating you to undertake your specific project. And so I think clicked off there a little bit. And so in addition to audience and purpose and everything, you always kind of have that same kind of like personal motivation working on whatever you're working on and everything. So the other category of online resources that I wanted to mention here are um, online digital newspaper collections. And I have a couple here listed. The Newspaper Archive, American Memory, Chronicling America. There's a whole bunch of them, and that's been kind of one of the new frontiers of the digital web, is getting newspapers online and available to historians for research. Um, and it's not only newspapers. There's also these really nice uh, open database collections of digital materials. But one thing I will say is most of this work with putting digital materials online really focuses on the 19th century and everything. and particularly the period from 1945 to the present, there's like gaping holes in what's available online, and you know why that is from our last unit on copyright. One of the most exciting websites that I've come across with digital collections is this Europeana thing. I'm not sure really how to, but it's just enormous. There's millions and millions of items in here from across Europe in all kinds of different historical periods that have been digitized and put on there for users. Now, the problem in general with all this material that's online, be it newspapers, be it databases, be it cultural objects, whatever, is being able to find materials that are useful. In other words, you just can't go to Google and type in a search topic and be able to find all kinds of items that are relevant to your project and everything. And so, for example, if I'm looking for materials dealing with the history of Slatington, this borough in Pennsylvania where I grew up, a Google search brings you some websites and everything, most of which are pretty much completely useless. But if you go back, for example, and start searching some of these digital collections and everything, so I did the Making of America, you find here in America 26 records where Slatington appears in these 19th century materials that might be in some way useful to my research on Slatington. Um, and so I also did an eBay search and everything. And don't forget, eBay is one of the, it's a great research tool and everything. You can find all kinds of materials on eBay, and you'd be surprised the quality and quantity of those materials and everything. And so one of the first places I often go to when I'm thinking of a new uh, research project or some sort of web-based project is I go to eBay to see what's available. I usually go to Flickr too to see if there's images out there and everything. What I mean to say here is that because of the depth of all these digital collections and everything, it's really hard for you to search for items because you got to search through every one of these collections independently, and that actually means that the real problem in a lot of cases is finding the collections and everything. So like we get back to this search thing where I'm searching for materials on Slatington, which is in Pennsylvania. Sure, I know that I should look at this Penn State thing, but I'm not really sure what other colleges and universities have produced digital collections that might be useful for me. And I'm not really sure, well, I can start with the State Museum of Pennsylvania or the State Archives, but they don't always have like good digital resources and everything. And so it really becomes problematic for you as a researcher to be able to identify where the relevant digital collections are that you can use that are on the web and everything. And so again, for this unit on information on the web, we're dealing with this explosion of digital information and everything, and that's good on one hand because the stuff is up there. It's bad on the other hand because it's not from 1945 to the present generally, and it's also bad because it's made searching and finding that information a lot more complex.